Welcome to the Behind the Bits podcast. Your host, Scott Curtis, wants to learn everything he can about stand-up comedy and take you along for the ride. Scott and his guests talk serious about comedy in every episode. Behind the Bits will uncover knowledge from different perspectives on subjects such as writing and performing stand-up comedy, as well as booking shows and the comedy life. If you're thinking about becoming a stand-up comic, already in the comic game, or a comedy nerd, Behind the Bits is the show for you. Now, let's get Behind the Bits.
Hey, BTB buddies, this episode where I interviewed Dr. Peter McGraw was actually recorded before COVID-19 shut down the country, so there's no mention of that. Dr. McGraw is the co-author of The Humor Code, which you can get on Amazon right now, and has a book coming out called Stick to Business, What the Masters of Comedy Can Teach You About Breaking Rules, Being Fearless, and Building a Serious Career. I've actually skimmed this book, and it looks like a really good book. You guys are looking for things to do and read while you are shut in, and this looks like a good one. So check it out on Amazon. It's SHTICK to Business, and it is available on April 1st. So you can be an early adopter of this book, and if you like it, please tell your friends. Here is Dr. Peter McGraw. All right, we're back at the Behind the Bits podcast. I'm still Scott Curtis, and I've got Dr. Peter McGraw here with me. How you doing, Peter?
I'm great. Thanks, Scott.
I know I can call you Pete because I read your book, but I wanted to make sure I got the Dr. Peter McGraw in there so people know I'm talking to an actual Ph.D. dude. So
I appreciate
I need cred.
I appreciate it. I've tried to move to Peter. If when I turned 40, I thought, I'm an adult. I should be Peter, not Pete.
Uh-huh.
But it hasn't quite stuck.
Yeah, I've tried to go from Scott to Scott, and that hasn't stuck either. So, so just some of the things I know about you just through Googling. You've got your PhD is in quantitative psychology, and you teach a PhD course in behavioral economics and MBA course in marketing management at the University of Colorado Boulder. And you wrote, along with Joel Warner, The Humor Code, which is a very good book. As I told you, I'm about a third of the way through it, and I've got a few things to throw at you about that book. And you've got a new book coming out. I'd like to kind of bookend the podcast with talking about the new book, and then maybe as we end the podcast, maybe mention it again, because from what I have read from the draft you sent me, I think it's really, really good because I'm in business, and I think it really relates.
Well, that's fantastic. So first of all, I appreciate you actually reading that book, The Humor Code, because I don't think a lot of people have.
Uh-huh.
And so it's very nice. And if you're enjoying it, you should give most of the credit to Joel Warner because he did the heavy lifting on the writing of that book, as you might imagine.
Yeah.
He's a Denver-based journalist and an incredible writer.
I really liked his point of view in that book. It was very good.
That's fun. It's actually, for the listener, it's the book's a kind of part pop science, part travelogue, part memoir that looks at the question, what makes things funny? And we travel around the world. But the way the book is written is it's kind of like a buddy road trip comedy. And it's told from Joel's perspective. So he makes fun of me a lot.
Yeah, he sure does. But the new book, I want to get into that first. Stick to Business. Can you give me a brief synopsis of this? Because I know it's coming out April 1st, and I want people to know what this is all about.
Yeah, so the book's it'll be available on Amazon April 1st. You can go to PeterMcGraw.org for some other information, including I'm going to be offering a free workbook to work through some of the lessons in there. Mm-hmm. But the idea behind the book is it's a little different than what you might expect. So it's not a book about being funny. It's a book about thinking funny, that is, thinking differently. Mm-hmm. And in it, I kind of pull back the curtain and take a look at the craft of comedy, and do profiles and look at cases of the world's funniest people and mm-hmm. how they have these very interesting practices and perspectives that help them do an incredibly difficult task, which right. is create laughs on command. And then I translate those practices and perspectives into lessons for people like you, people who are entrepreneurial, people who want to try to get ahead in business, people who are trying to improve their careers. And so I like to say it's serious business lessons from the world's funniest people.
Uh-huh. Well, that's great. I talk about my podcast as serious talk about comedy, so it fits well.
Great minds think alike.
Yeah, no doubt. As you did the research for this book, obviously you were looking at different comics who, I guess the words that I always hear is stay in your lane. And most of these comics, the way they broke through and got successful was by not staying in their lane. And yes. Can you speak to that a little bit? Because I think that's really important.
Yeah, so if you think about it, so I have this saying, I teach an MBA course in marketing management, I teach a Ph.D. course in behavioral economics, and I say to my MBA students in particular, I start my class, I say, business is hard, business is hard, business is hard. We have a tendency to think it's easy because we always see the successes and we don't see the 90, 95, 99% of companies and entrepreneurial ventures that fail. Mm-hmm. And what is also hard is comedy is hard. Right. It's cutthroat, it's difficult. And in many ways, it's actually even more difficult than business, right? So Starbucks can sell you the same pumpkin spice latte every October, mm-hmm. and you never get sick of it. But Bill Burr can't tell you the same joke 2 specials in a row.
Right.
And so what comics are doing is they're living in a world where there's lots of competition for those jobs, and they're in such a state of creative focus because they need to pursue novelty unlike any other business, that they, the smart ones, the good ones, the successful ones, do 2 things. They learn to see the world differently because they need to see the world differently in order to make those creative right. bursts of joy, right, that come mm-hmm. as a result of jokes. Then they also need to break rules in order to make their way mm-hmm. and to be different and to be successful. And so there's a certain amount of kind of misbehavior that happens in comedy. Like if you play things nice, if you play by the rules, if you try to be like everyone else, you're not getting anywhere. Right. And my argument is that too much of business, as you say, stay in your lane. I talk about what I call the status quo bias. Uh-huh. Well, this is the way we do it. This is the way it's always been done. Well, if everybody thinks like that, now you end up having products and marketing communications that just all seem the same.
Right.
And so can you think about creating products and marketing communications that are more like jokes, that is, that stand out from the rest? Mm-hmm.
When I think of how comic things, because I'm like half a comic, I understand that you're always thinking on your feet and you're always trying to stand out. You're trying to be the one that people remember. I mean, if you're in a showcase and there's 10 or 12 of you or whatever, then you want to be the one that they remember. And I guess it doesn't necessarily have to be like, it doesn't have to be outlandish. It doesn't have to be political or anything like that in the comedy world. It just has to stand out and be different. Yeah. Yes.
As I like to say, it has to be good.
Yeah.
Right. And the issue is what good is that it solves a problem in a new way. Right. Things that are creative are original, appropriate solutions. And by virtue of being a joke, it has to be creative and then hence good. So I agree with you. It doesn't have to be outlandish. It just has to be different. And so, so the book, of course, doesn't just, it looks very heavily at stand-up comics, but it doesn't focus exclusively on stand-up comics. I also talk about improv and sketch comedy. And you said something that's reminiscent of one of the lessons in the book. So what I say is that that oftentimes when it comes to making something, a single individual can come up with a creative idea, but you often need others in order to make something innovative. And so now what's happened is you have to move from a place of perhaps like misbehaving, thinking differently, breaking rules, to then stepping into a world where you need to get along with people.
Right.
And so you need to find people who cooperate with you, know. So you're a podcaster, you have a voiceover artist. You need to get along with that voiceover artist,
right,
even if you have some creative differences and so on. And so you need the voiceover artist because they're a professional. They need you because they need work. And together you want to come together and create something great.
Yep.
And so one of the things I talk about is I call it here. So it's HEARHERE, which is how important it is to listen. And how important it is to pay attention. And comics understand that because as they refine their jokes, they're paying special attention to how is the audience reacting. And then they're making slight changes, paying attention to how the audience is reacting, making slight changes, paying attention to how the audience is reacting. Well, good product managers are doing exactly that same thing, right? You launched this podcast. You're paying attention to what am I getting positive feedback about? What am I not getting positive feedback about?
Yep.
So to the listener, I can't help myself. Scott had asked me to be on this podcast, and so I listened to some episodes, and I was like, dude, your intros are too long.
Yeah.
And so, if you're an improviser, you're making a scene out of nothing. Well, you cannot be standing in a scene as an improviser just thinking about what you're going to say next, because your scene partner might be talking about how you're on a rocket ship to Mars, and you're thinking we're on a Boeing 747.
Right.
And so then you talk about the flight attendant because you weren't listening to your scene partner. And so good business, being a good manager, being a good founder, being a good CEO is not just about telling people stuff. It's also about hearing what they have to say, and especially when those people are the customers.
Right.
And so,
and the funny thing is you need to talk about ego there too, because I could have said, well, screw you, Pete. I really like my intros and I'm going to do it that way. But you weren't the only one that said it. I got a couple feedbacks that way, and guess what? My ego's not so strong that I'm not going to change it. So, I made the changes.
Indeed. Look, I would say this, if you want to make art, then you can ignore what the audience says.
Yeah.
But if you want to make entertainment, right? So if you want people to pay attention, then they get a say in it, And so I like to say that vaudeville was the first lean startup. Yep. And so it's like the world of business has been slow to this idea.
Right.
But the idea of putting out a minimum viable product, something that you are nearly embarrassed by, has been happening for years. It just feels like it started in Silicon Valley 10, 15 years ago.
Right. Yeah, I did have an epiphany while I was reading your book. I've always maintained that artists, and I'll go into musicians and comics, that they don't really change history so much. They are chronicles of history. And you go back to the 60s and all the flower power and stuff like that. The Mamas and the Papas and Steppenwolf and Led Zeppelin, they didn't really change anything. They made good music that was showing what was going on at the time. But in your book, you totally turn that on its heel. And then you go back to like Lenny Bruce, you know, he was pushing the envelope, but he was talking about what was actually going on in the world at that time. I don't think he made any major changes. He was just chronicling. But then you've got a part of the book that totally turned that on its head when you talked about Hannibal Buress's his Cosby thing, because that actually changed history. Can you go into that just a little bit?
Yeah, so this is something that goes all the way back to our travels in the humor code. You know, a lot of people, especially comics, like to think that comedy can change the world. And this guy, I forget his first name. His last name is Davies, who we met with, puts forth, he talks about comedy either as a thermostat or as a thermometer. And so the idea that comedy can change the world is thinking about comedy as a thermostat. You can turn the heat up, you can turn the heat down in a room, so to speak. That is, you can change the way people think about the world. And I think that comics aspire to do that. I also think that that's rather rare. I share your opinion. I think that that's rather rare.
Yeah.
What is happening most of the time is that comedy is serving as a thermometer. That is, that it's taking the temperature of the room. And so, you know, when people are, you know, when comics move from making fun of homosexuals to making fun of homophobes, you could say that they're changing the world, but I think most of it is they're just tuning in that the world has changed their opinion about sexual orientation.
Exactly.
Now, that's not to say that these things are mutually exclusive. While I think that comedy is most often a thermometer, on occasion it can be a thermostat. And so the anecdote that I have in Shtick to Business is about Hannibal Buress. So, you know, Hannibal Buress is probably operates best as a stand-up comic. So he was a writer in SNL and really couldn't get any of his sketches on TV. You know, you can find him on the Eric Andre show playing himself. But, you know, he's a stand-up comic, and he's a good stand-up comic. And he had been working on a bit where he was railing against Bill Cosby telling young black men how they should behave, like they should pull their pants up. You know, and so this sort of, you know, this old comic, you know, kind of telling these young guys how they should behave, and basically Buress is like, you don't have any place to be telling us how to behave because you're a rapist. And he essentially told the world, like, Google Bill Cosby rape, and you're going to find all these stories about this stuff. And then that bit, as he was working it through, got picked up by a television station. And that served as like ground zero for this explosion of media coverage, women coming forward, and obviously, you know what has happened since. Yeah,
that you know, that changed my mind, and I'm right on the same page with you. I mean, we're usually a thermometer, we're a chronicler, and you can go back to, you know, what Bill Hicks was doing or whatever at any given time and know what was going on in the 80s and that type of stuff. But, you know, in most cases we're not changing things, and we shouldn't act like we are.
Yes, I have another little quick thing. So you're a comic, so you know who Doug Stanhope is.
Oh yeah.
But if your listeners don't know who Doug Stanhope is, he's a super interesting dude. Right? Talk about someone who misbehaves. Talk about someone who breaks rules, who lives the way he wants to live. He lives on this compound in a tiny 5,000 person town in Bisbee, Arizona. But Doug's a very smart guy, and he certainly is, I think, a funny stand-up. So in terms of, like, I'll give you an example of his misbehavior. He did a stand-up special and wrote a book called Digging Up Mother, in which he talks about his mother committing suicide because she was dying of emphysema. And how he was there. I mean, he had a very loving relationship with his mother. This is told with a great deal of affection. But, she took like 30 morphine pills washed down with cocktails, and he and his friends roasted her.
Yeah.
He even thought about hiring a party clown for the event. But Bisbee is too small to have a professional clown.
Yeah.
But Doug has a bit about how he tells all these jokes to rooms full of drunk people, and the problems just keep resurfacing. He's like, yeah, I tackled that problem in a 2004 special. Why is it coming up in the news again? Even these comics who want to change the world recognize that the limits of comedy in order to do that.
Yeah, you might change a few minds, but you're definitely not going to move mountains.
Yeah, I will tell you this. I do think that it happens. Here's how I think that it happens. It goes something like this. Let's suppose someone in the audience is a homophobe, okay? And Doug Stanhope gets on stage and makes fun of homophobes. And the audience laughs and gives him an applause break. That person is sitting there going, oh, maybe this is not okay. Right. You know what I mean? And the role that social pressure plays is, I think, not trivial in terms of changing people's mind. I mean, the best way to change someone's mind is for the people they want to have sex with to not like whatever it is that they believe.
Yeah. Yeah, that's not going to happen.
No, that's right.
One of the things that in the Shtick to Business book that the comics that you mention, so I see a lot of comics, and I see a lot of very good comics, but they are traveling around doing, one night roadhouse stands and barely getting by, and some of them are just as funny as the ones that you see that have a Netflix special. They could be as funny as Bill Burr. Have you found some common denominators between comics who are good and comics who are good and then get successful?
Yeah, okay. So first of all, to be good at comedy and also to be good at business, it really helps to be smart. Yeah. Right? Like, so it just helps to have horsepower. And in part because intelligence is correlated with creative ability, for example. And so it helps to be smart. Now, you're born with some level of intelligence, but fortunately you can add on to that by working at it. That is, like, reading and being knowledgeable about the world and learning and so on. And one of the things that seems very clear is that the world's most successful comics and the world's most successful people in business, they're voracious consumers of ideas. Right. And so that is that they pay attention to the world. And then, this is an aside, this is not in the book, but, what happens, I don't think a lot of people realize this, is that there's compounding effects of knowledge, right? So reading 1,000 books is not 1,000 times better than reading one book. Right. It's 10,000 times better than reading one book. Right. So, you get these nonlinear effects because you can start to create an associative network and start to really understand the world. Where then like, for example, because you know so much about music and you know so much about comedy, you can then start to put together things about music and comedy that you wouldn't have otherwise, right? And get these multiplier effects. Now, the difference, though, between the people who are funny and the people who are successful, or the people who are smart in business and the people who are successful, besides some of the obvious, is sometimes it's just luck. Sometimes you're too early, sometimes you're too late, is that these people are professionals. Yeah. Right. That is that they approach this, and in chapter 6, I call it work hard or hardly work. They have this craftsperson approach to making things amazing, and it goes something like this: you identify what are the most important tasks to do. Right. So maybe if you're a startup, it's about the code that you're writing for this this new program, platform, app, whatever it might be. If you're a comic, it's obviously writing jokes and testing those jokes. Once you know where most of your reward comes from, then what you have to do is protect your time to allow you to do those things.
Right.
So, you know, I'm never going to do a podcast during my writing time. You know, I mean, you know, podcasts are important for me in terms of getting the message out, but the writing is the most important thing. And so then you protect that time, you make that time sacred. Next, what you do is you work on this ideally daily. You know, so this becomes a daily practice. So you're not jamming 14 hours of programming into one day a week or 14 hours of joke writing into one day a week. You're doing 2 hours of programming intensely 7 days a week.
Right.
Or 2 hours of joke writing 7 days a week. And then one of the cool things, and I don't think people often get this message, is that at some point you release yourself from this task and you let yourself, do some of the other less important tasks that you need to pay bills or whatever it is. And then some of it is you do things that make you a better person. You know, spend time with your partner, see friends, get exercise, go for a walk, take a hike, take a nap. You know what I mean? Eat a good, delicious meal. The kinds of things that you need to enjoy yourself. And so I call it, you know, so you protect, you grind, and you release. And so, you know, when you look at it, what are comics doing is they are they're working during the day to write their material, and they're going to open mics at night testing it, but they're also having downtime in between.
Right.
And so Charles Schultz, for example, 5 days a week, you know, would get up in the morning, you know, feed his kids breakfast, take them to school, and then from, you know, 8:30 to 4:30 p.m., he wrote Peanuts cartoons. He wrote thousands upon thousands by himself, because Monday through Friday, he protected that time. He was a grinder. But then when the kids came home, he became a dad again. You know, and so on. And I think that a lot of anything that's sort of worth doing in a professional sense, you can approach it with that same craftsperson-like mentality.
Right. I think it's also important to constantly evaluate how you're spending your time so that you are able to carve out that time. A personal experience, you know, I've got this phone and I had a bunch of games on the phone, and I played those games, and I looked at it and I said, no, I can't do that anymore. I've got stuff to do, and you know, I just deleted them and moved on.
Good for you. I'm happy to hear that. So I have this other project that I'm working on. It's a new podcast, and it's called Solo: The Single Person's Guide to a Remarkable Life. So it's for basically, it's a positive view of single living. And one of the principles that I put forward is to try to create more than you consume. You know, to turn people more into artists.
Right.
And so the problem is consumption's easy. And it's often really good. You know, those games are made to capture your attention. And television and film and music has never been better in terms of getting you to just keep tuning in. And so in that way, those things are a lot like sugar. You know, they're good in the moment, but bad in the long run. And what I want people to do is to create more. That's more like exercise. You know, I want them to write and paint and make music and write jokes and build businesses. And so on. And so in order to do that, you have to, what you're doing when you deleted your game apps off of your phone is you're protecting your time.
Right.
You know, and I will often, so for example, when I was editing Shtick to Business, I would print out a paper copy of the book. I would go to a local coffee shop. I would leave my computer and my phone in my apartment, and I would bring my wallet, keys, a blue pen, and a stack of hundreds of pages.
Right.
And I would just sit there and read and mark up the pages.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I got like a little tired or I hit a sticky spot, the best I could do was get up, stand outside, get a little bit of fresh air. And then it was like back to that work.
Right.
Because, you know, and then what happened was when I was done, then I could like go enjoy myself.
Yeah.
You know, because it's a job well done.
And you feel good about it. I mean, and you know, we know in this day and age there are so many things competing for our attention that our attention spans are smaller. You know, you're in marketing, you know, and we have to take that back ourselves. Nobody's going to give it to us. We have to understand where our attention is going and take that back and put it into more positive things. Absolutely,
Scott. I think about this for a moment, and I really, you know, I want this book to be inspirational to people, but I'm going to put this in if I can, I'm going to try to put this in a more provocative way. Is like, first of all, you've got one life to live. Mm-hmm. And when you look back at the end of your life, you're not going to go, I wish I watched more TV. I wish I played more games on my phone.
Right.
You're going to say, you know, I wish I was a better friend. I wish I had become a better painter. I wish I had always built the business that I wanted. I wish that I got out of that shitty job earlier. Mm-hmm. And so when you think about that, the stakes go way, way up. And so when the stakes are that high, then what you need to do is make profound change in your life, which is, I can't let my damn phone and my Wi-Fi get in the way of my success.
Yep.
And where does success come from? Success does not come from dumb luck. Success comes from creating real value in the world. Mm-hmm. And creating real value in the world is a difficult creative process.
Right.
Now, the beautiful thing, and this is where we can look to the arts and comedy for inspiration, is that when you put yourself into that creative mindset on a regular basis, it starts to feel less like work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I don't know if you've ever had this, but when you're working on a creative project, is that like time sort of evaporates.
Yeah.
You forget to eat.
Yeah.
You know, you go, oh my God, 3 hours just went by. You know. But the issue is that doesn't happen on day 1 or day 31, but it may happen on day 301.
Right.
And so then that becomes really addicting.
Yeah.
Because now you're making something and enjoying yourself.
Yeah.
Along the way. Now, it's not in the same way that you enjoy playing a game on an app.
Yeah.
But it's still satisfying. And then you have something to show for it.
Yeah. Yeah, obviously, you know, having something concrete in your hand that you've done is a lot more exciting, and it's better than, you know, defeating level 127 in Candy Crush. You know, it just makes you feel better.
Also, here's the other thing: is Candy Crush does not pay the mortgage. Mm-mm. It does not put your kids in through college.
Yeah.
Right. And so, you know, work is called work for a reason. Mm-hmm. You know, they have to pay you to do it.
Right.
But why not do it well enough that they will pay you more to do it?
Yeah.
Or why not take that chance on that business that you've been thinking about doing, so then you can become your own boss,
right,
and that you're not limited by whatever HR says we are going to pay a, you know, VP.
Mm-hmm. Right.
You know.
Yeah.
And please.
Yeah. I think I can make a pretty good analogy, first of all, for the arts and thinking outside the box and concentrating on one thing to make themselves better. And it's a city. It's Grand Rapids, Michigan. Okay. You know, several years ago, probably 10, 15 years ago, Grand Rapids was really just a slum all the way through. They didn't attract anybody. Nothing happened there. They had some businesses there, but it was just a crappy city. And they turned to the arts. You know, they very specifically turned to the arts and said, we're going to make this an arts town. And so they started, bringing different musicians, comics in. They started making new venues. And now you go to Grand Rapids, my wife and I go there quite a bit. And that town, it's like maybe, I think, 150,000 people. And, we'll leave a bar at 2 a.m. and people are just getting started. It's bustling, and businesses come in because of it. And it's amazing what the arts did, and it's amazing what they did what happened when they decided they wanted to change things.
I see. Yeah, it's great. Yeah, I mean, the thing is that I've written the book for the individual, but I think also organizations can learn from this, which is you need to think differently if you're going to get ahead. Mm-hmm. The world rewards the risks associated with creativity, authenticity, being different.
Right.
We don't need another competitor to Coca-Cola.
Right. Yeah.
Right. You know what I mean? Like, if something's already being done a certain way, don't, by your competitors, don't mimic it. Right. Mm-hmm. If you want to give people a reason to move and live and stay in Grand Rapids, Michigan, you can't do the same thing that the next town is doing because you don't have a reason to it. Right. So yeah, if you're like, we're going to make this a vibrant cultural place for a smaller city, right? What's the knock against smaller cities, which is they're nice places to live, but they're not very you always think, I got to go to Chicago for culture.
Right.
And if you can give people culture in the town that they live in, then you attract people who want culture. And guess what? You know what? People who want culture are the kinds of people you want in your community.
Yep. Very true.
And so now you have better dentists who live in your community, and you have better insurance agents who live in your community, and better, right? And then it starts to build on itself.
Yeah.
It's a neat example. It's a really neat example.
I wish the town next to me would do that, because we're a town of about, Mishawaka is very small, but South Bend's about 100,000, and they could do a lot better, and maybe someday they will. But I think that's it's very provocative to think that to take the comedy way of thinking and put it into business. And I can't wait to get through that book because I'm in business, and I'm in a situation where we got a lot of silos, and the stay in your lane thing always comes up, and I'm like, I've been around here 14 years. I'm not going to stay in my lane. I'm going to come into your silo and tell you this is how you're affecting our client base. But I'm only one, and it's really neat to be able to associate that with something I'm so passionate about, which is obviously stand-up comedy.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, I hope it's helpful. You know what I mean? Like I have found that writing the book has even changed my perspective. So many of these things I was already doing because I was sort of, either pulling them from my own kind of behavioral economics background or seeing these kind of lessons help comics succeed in this very competitive world. But even having sort of done this, like I'm writing the book and then I start doing the things that I'm saying in the book, and it helps me, become a better professional.
Right.
And for example, I'll give you another quick example of this personally. So one of the kind of cheat codes in comedy is to be authentic. Right. And so the idea is that if you try to be something you're not, first of all, audiences are really good at picking that up.
Yep.
And then the other thing is, like, when you are authentic to yourself, about yourself, that's often new and novel and titillating to an audience, right? Like people really like that.
Yeah.
I tell an anecdote about Hannah Gatsby. So Hannah Gatsby is a comedian. She had a very popular, and some people would say groundbreaking, Netflix special in which she talks about fearing that she has to give up comedy. And so for the first half of the Netflix special, she tells jokes. The second half, she forgoes the jokes in order to talk about her struggles, especially as a lesbian, and how it doesn't feel good to her for her to self-deprecate in order to make comedy. Well, she closes that Netflix special to a standing ovation. And Hannah's never worked more in her life, right? Like she just took, this sort of step out of the stream approach that I like to say, and has kind of recreated her career. Well, what I have found with this new side hustle, this project on single living, I've had to kind of reveal the thing that was sort of private about my life. Which was about being a bachelor and the good, the bad, and the ugly of being a single man, and never having married and never having children. I could tell you, Scott, I've never received as many emails, text messages, phone calls, social media messages from people saying, "Oh my God, I love this." Like, you know what I mean? Wow, you're a much better podcaster in that podcast than your I'm Not Joking podcast.
Yeah.
And so that idea of authenticity, you could take even further and say, well, maybe if I'm thinking about starting my own entrepreneurial venture, maybe the best place to start is just with the thing that it matters to me. The thing that I think is going to be the perfect solution for me. And then what might happen in a world of 8 billion people, maybe there's enough people out there who share that problem and that perspective. But because you did it for you, it's likely to be unique, right? It's likely to be authentic. And I think that's there's a good lesson in there where a lot of comics' jokes start with something that they find funny. And then they turn it into something that not everyone else, excuse me, their audience finds funny.
Right. Yeah. And, it's funny. I did a podcast before this one. It was a local podcast, and I put almost 5 years into it, and it was pretty popular. And when I stopped doing it, a lot of people said, "Hey, what are you doing? Don't stop." I didn't have any passion for it anymore. I was doing the stand-up, and I wanted to take this journey where I talk to everybody about stand-up comedy and what it's all about, and make a little chronicle for them, make a book of information that they can go to anytime and listen to it and get a little bit of a nugget of information that they can take and be better. And let me tell you, I'm putting a heck of a lot more effort into this one than I did the last one.
That's great. And also, sometimes you have to, so comics will, one of the things that I talk about in the book, in the Step Out of the Stream chapter, is that comics will often embrace constraints in a way that the average person laments constraints. So it goes a little like this, right? Like there's something that says, how do I say this right? Oh, you can't do that, right? Like, so comics who decide to work clean are creating a constraint. And because they don't rely on F-bombs for cheap laughs, it forces them to work that much harder on coming up with good material. Well, one of the natural constraints is I'm Chris Rock. I do a Netflix special. Well, I can't go out on the road and tell those jokes again because my audience already knows those jokes. It forces me to then start over again. Well, you have a podcast. The podcast is good, but you want to make a great podcast. Maybe you need to shutter the good podcast and start over in order to make something great. It's very hard for people to kill their darlings. They care about sunk costs, and so on. And so, this goes against people's instincts, which is sometimes you have to say no to things in order to make room and space for things to create.
That's an important point, learning how to say no, because I'm always a yes man. And it gets me into trouble and makes me lose sleep. That's and it takes away from the things that I actually care about too.
Indeed. Yeah, that's the thing is like we have a finite amount of time and energy.
Right.
And so, as I was saying earlier, what is the most rewarding ways to spend that time? And because you get one life.
Yeah.
And because what I want people to do is I want them, if they want to climb the corporate ladder, I want to help them climb the corporate ladder. If they want to start a new business, I want them to start a new business. If they're going to get out of a shitty job, I want to help them get out of a shitty job.
Yeah.
I just think it's fun that we can look to these kind of misfits, these people who wear cargo pants to work, as inspiration and for ideas in order to do that.
Right.
Because one thing about those folks, most of them live life the way they want to live their lives.
Yep.
And I find that really inspirational.
Yep. And you have to respect it, even if you don't like it. And I know we're coming up against, you're promoting this book like crazy. We're coming up against time. I got a couple things I want to mention.
Sure.
First of all, I know you're taking a break from doing new episodes of the I'm Not Joking podcast, but I do want to direct everybody who's listening to listen to the Todd Glass episode because
yes.
The guy is nuts, but when he talks about venues, I mean, most of the thing is about venues and how to do a perfect venue and all that. It is absolutely gold. I think, I've listened to a few years, and that's a podcast that stands out, and I actually listened to it twice because I wanted to get all the information I could from it. And I've always loved Todd Glass, and that episode was fantastic.
That's great to hear. So one thing, the good news is that I'm basically I've been a little slow on my I'm Not Joking ones, but I'm launching a podcast every day for 10 days right around the book launch. Uh-huh. And I've got some very fun guests, including I got Anthony Jeselnik for one of those podcasts. I think on the April 3rd day.
Were there a lot of long pauses during that interview?
No, it was great. It was fun because I'm actually a fan, and so I found myself being mildly nervous, which doesn't normally happen in a podcast from me. But he was really quite gracious, and he's such a smart guy. Todd, first of all, I will tell you this. Todd is just a lovely man, so he has, when he's on stage or when he's on a podcast, he's amplified.
Yep.
So when the lights aren't on, he's a much more normal kind of personality, but he can get rather agitated and amplified. And I really enjoyed that podcast too. Enough so that so in it we talk about how do you engineer the perfect comedy space? So how do you create a context? And in Stick to Business, I use those ideas to talk about how do you create a space for yourself at work or otherwise that will allow you to be maximally productive. And so, I think it's a nice reminder, whether you're creating a retail environment or you're planning an office, that your space needs to maximize whatever it is that you need to maximize. Right. So, my joke is, you need to hire someone new. Okay, let's sit around a rectangular table under fluorescent lights and discuss it. Oh, we need a new feature for this product. Let's sit around a rectangular table under fluorescent lights and discuss it. Yeah. We need a new brand. Well, let's sit around a rectangular table under fluorescent lights and discuss it. Well, that cannot be the best way to do all three of those things. Nope. And so then what is it that you need? And I tell a story about one of my friends and colleagues, this guy, Ethan Decker. He has crowned himself the master of energy. And so when there's a meeting, he is engineering the space, like opening the blinds to let natural light in. And he's making sure the temperature in the room is right. And he's putting out dark chocolate. And he has, you know what I mean? He's during breaks playing music so people can have side conversations, and you know what I mean?
Right.
And all of that is exactly the same kind of, it's not the same way that you create comedy, but it's around the same principle, which is we have a goal and let's make a context
Yeah.
that maximizes that goal.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I do my best thinking in shitty bars, so that's that's just the way it is.
Yeah, isn't it? Is it Hemingway who talked about a quiet, clean place?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah,
he has an essay where he talks about how everybody needs a quiet, clean place or something like that, and how a bar can be that place for someone.
Yeah, it means different things to different people. Some people want to be out in the sun. I like a dark bar. And
good for you.
Yeah. And one last thing I want to talk about, and this is mostly for me. Hopefully other comics have experienced this. So I'm 55 years old, and so I'm right in that boomer category. And my age group hangs on nostalgia like you wouldn't believe. And I am like the most anti-nostalgia guy in the world. Like if an REO Speedwagon song comes on the radio, I turn it. I'm always wanting to go forward. I want to learn new stuff. I want to hear new music. I want to listen to new comics and stuff like that. So I've done this joke about a million different ways, and it almost universally bombs, and I want to make it work somehow, but I don't know if I can. So basically I talk about nostalgia and how everybody in my age group thinks that Led Zeppelin is the end-all, be-all band, and they compare everybody to Led Zeppelin. They listen to Led Zeppelin all the time, and then my punchline goes to the effect, you know what, Led Zeppelin was a great band. I've listened to a lot of it, but I've listened to enough Led Zeppelin. I've turned it off, and you can too. And your reaction is exactly the reaction I get from crowds. I obviously do it better, but it's so funny how people hang on to, and being in marketing, you probably understand if you're marketing to my age group, that people hang on to that nostalgia so much, and it keeps them from moving forward in their life and making good changes. And I just, and that's the reason why I wrote the joke in the first place, so people could maybe say, hey, maybe I am hanging on to that too much, and I should burn my REO Speedwagon t-shirts and all that kind of stuff. But how does nostalgia play into marketing, comedy, business, all that?
All right, so that's interesting. So first of all, I think it's funny that you're trying to create a thermostat joke. All right, versus a thermometer joke.
Yeah.
I actually don't dislike your premise for this idea. So I like the idea of taking something that everybody thinks is good and then pointing out how it's bad, or taking something everything that people think is bad and pointing out how it's good. Right. So that's the classic. And I write about this in Stick to Business. That's the reversal. Everybody says go, you say stop. Everybody says stop, you say go. Yeah. And there's a chance for some comedy in that. Now, of course, the thing is that just because you're doing a reversal doesn't mean that it's going to be funny. Right. That's where the creativity and artistry comes in. And so I think, first of all, that I think that nostalgia, is a little bit of a double-edged sword, right? So I think it's nice to be wistful about the past, right? It helps us feel more comfortable with our pasts. The problem, of course, is that you can never get back to the past, right? The future is more important than the past to our livelihoods, to our health, to our well-being. The other thing is that the past, and I feel comfortable in saying this, the past is never as good as we remember it. Yeah. And the reason is that the passing of time helps to dampen all the negative things. I like to say the 80s sucked. Let's stop romanticizing the 80s. The economy was trash. Yeah. The fashion was bad. And we do remember the good songs, but part of the reason why we think 80s music is so good is because we never hear the bad songs. Yeah. Right? You know what I mean? Right? So even Led Zeppelin has bad songs.
Oh, yeah.
But we only hear the good ones, right? Because they're the ones who stand the test of time. Yeah. So on one hand, I do think that nostalgia is an opportunity because, again, it helps us feel good and helps us feel good about the past. But I think that it gets in the way of progress,
Yeah.
in that sense, which is like you could spend the rest of your life listening to Led Zeppelin, and that music is quite fine. It's quite good. But you're missing out on opportunities for a lot of other good music, even music that was influenced by Led Zeppelin, right? Like, you know what I mean? Like, so there's some chance that innovation has happened, and that some things that are new and novel are valuable. Now, what I can't do is tell you how to make that joke work, but I would tell you that you shouldn't give up on that joke yet. I think that the premise is right, but there's probably a different approach that feels less threatening. So, for example, like, I'm just spitballing here. This is what comics do all the time, right? Which is like, oh, well, maybe there's another way to show how you give up other things about the 60s and 70s, right? You're not wearing bell bottoms anymore.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Right. Like, you now shave your bush, and you didn't do that back then. Right. Like, there might be a way to get a lot of laugh lines around the idea, and you never have to tell people you should stop listening to Led Zeppelin. Right. Rather, you could point out, how peculiar it is that you still listen to Led Zeppelin and you do almost nothing else. Yeah. that used to be done in the 60s. Right. Yeah. Right. Like, I don't know. It's just an idea, right? Like, you don't drive those cars. Those cars are death traps. Yeah. You know what I mean? You don't put leaded gasoline in your car anymore. That's terrible for your environment. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, so I would say, like, keep fussing with it. Yeah. Because again, I think that there's a kernel there that there's, and by the way, no one will ever be as motivated to tell that joke well as you. Yeah. I definitely own it. And I think you're right. I think that's always been a single punchline joke. And I think if I put multiple tags in there, it, first of all, will soften the blow, and also get them to where they're not as threatened, and it'll work with all ages of audience. Young people usually get it, but when I do it in front of people my age, which is usually who I'm playing to, it just doesn't work. Yeah, I wonder if there's I don't know. I I'm not a comedian. I spend a lot of time with comics and I study their process, but I don't have if I ended up becoming a comic, I'd have to become kind of a grinder. You know what I mean? Like, where I just need to work, because I don't always have the best instincts when it comes to writing material. Right. Well, Peter, we've talked for a while here, and it's been wonderful talking. I want to make sure that our audience understands what you are doing. Okay, first of all, we got the Humor Code, which is available now. I like the book. You should read it, and you should also get the audio book, because that's how I'm going through it. Fun. Yeah, it's a fun. As a quick aside, the voiceover artist who does the Humor Code's audio book is in the movie Caddyshack. He's one of the kids who basically there's a classic scene with Bill Murray telling a story about playing golf with the Dalai Lama, and he's sort of holding a pitchfork and kind of has this kid cornered. That kid grew up to become a voiceover actor. Cool. This guy Peter. Yeah. That's the guy. It's a funny little thing. That's really cool. And then, April 1st, Shtick to Business comes out. Can we pre-order that on Amazon now? It will be up shortly. I don't know when this podcast is going to come out, but by the time it comes out, it'd probably be ordered. But I asked people to buy it on April 1st if they could. Okay, excellent. And please write reviews. I'm happy to, if you like it, please leave a review. That matters. Well, I'm gonna make the purchase, and I'm gonna leave a review, so that's great. And also, make sure you subscribe to the I'm Not Joking podcast. As Peter said, he's got some a bunch of episodes coming up, including Anthony Jeselnik, and I'm going to be glued to my car speakers when I listen to that one. It's a good one. Yeah. I really appreciate you being on the podcast, Peter, and I wish you the best. I've been inspired by what you've written, and I think you're doing great stuff. I really appreciate it. I wish you the best, and I'm thrilled that you're doing this podcast, something that you feel energized and excited about.
Right. Well, thanks a lot.
Cheers. Appreciate it.